Okay, this is going to be week 2 of the build. You're going to see that there's quite a lot of complicated figuring out to do. The first thing we're going to have to do is to frame one wall at a time. Now the back wall is going to be the easiest because it is just a set of studs. There's no windows, there's no doors. All I'm planning on doing is 2x4s, stud every 400mm and all the way across. So it's just a case of making sure we measure right, we cut right, we lay it out so that the floor is our guide, and from there we should be absolutely fine. Let's get cutting. Now, I'm not going to show every single cut, but I do think it's important to show a few and to talk you through what I'm doing. So, as with everything I cut in this, it's speed square and the circular saw. Now, that's not the important bit. They're all the same length. So I cut the first, and then I just laid 2 scrap pieces at the top, 1 at the bottom, took an overall measurement, because this will be the height of the overall wall, and I can just make sure that I'm accurate. And then if this one's right, I know that every other stud will be right, because they're all the same. So I just mark them off, cut them, and lay them out. I'm sure I'm going to say this in every single video about this whole build series, but I'm not an expert. I'm not showing you how to do it. I'm just hopefully showing you that it is possible for somebody with limited skills to give it a go and to make something pretty impressive. Well, pretty impressive to me anyway. Now, in case you don't know what I'm doing here, I'm laying them all out on the base because the back of the base itself is the exact width of the back wall. So I can make sure that I am getting it spot on, so when I raise the wall, everything is in exactly the right shape and hopefully as square as possible. And these are the screws I'm going to hook it together with. 100mm screws, and these ones just happen to have a hex head on them. I found those easier to drive overall. Now, one consideration you guys will have to make if you go down this route is whether you go down with screws or whether you go with nails. Now, nails overall I think are more flexible, whereas screws to me felt safer. They pulled the wood together in places where it might not necessarily have been flush. And here, if one of your 2x4s twists, great tip, get your clamp on it and pull it straight while one end's attached, and then get your screws in it to hold it straight. And then once I'd done the main part of the wall, I just built the extra bit on the edge, which just completes the full span of that back wall. Now we need a row of noggins along the middle, and I've got all the offcuts from the top of the studs that I've done. So instead of cutting a load and realizing some of these are slightly different spaced, I'm going to take each one of these to the spaces. I'm just going to get it lined up at the top, mark it off, and then take that mark and cut it, and then that will drop in nicely. 1, 2, 3, 4. And once I've cut them all, screw them in, and I will put them at different levels just so that alternating, so that I can get a screw into the side. I screwed this down to make sure that that was square and this is square. So once we've done that, this wall is pretty much there. So we can... And yes, it was exactly there, and I forgot to film it. A pleasant morning, so I'm going to get cracking with framing this front wall, which is going to be the hardest. And it's going to have a lot more wood in it than this back wall. You didn't see me raise this, but I did it in 2 parts, as you can see here, and then I joined them together once they were upright. Part of that is because of the length of the wood I could get, and the other part is because there's no way I could lift the whole thing on my own and get it secured. Haven't worried about getting it perfectly 90 degrees. I'll do that once I raise the side walls and join it all together. You'll notice one thing I didn't explain in the last one. When I was framing it, I actually screwed the left-hand section once it was finished onto the base, using the base as a reference, because it was around about 30mm off on the corners, length on the diagonal measurements. So I just got it squared up by screwing it into the sides, and then once I came to raise it, I just put a scrap piece of 3/4 inch plywood across the back just to hold it in that position. Now, what will hold it there in truth for the long term is going to be once we put the OSB sheeting on the outside. I'm going to leave that until right at the end and do it all at once. I don't know exactly how many pieces I'm going to make this front wall in. I know it can't be 1, and I'm pretty sure it can't be 2. It might have to go up in 3 pieces, because you've got all that extra timber, you've got all of the extra wood across the window openings, and there's going to be 4 windows. What my plan is going to be is to lay everything out, get it all cut to length. I'm going to need to put some extra studs in there, wherever the joins are. I can then assess roughly what the weight's going to be, and then get it raised up in its pieces if needs be, and screwed together once it's in situ, like the back wall. I've put 2 of the boards up here against the wall that I've already made, and you'll see they're in 2 halves. 2 reasons. One, I didn't want to measure across the front just in case I was slightly off. Figured it's easier to measure across the back because they're going to need to be the same width walls. But also, while I'm here, I can mark where I've got studs on this wall, match them up where possible on that wall. That means when I put the beams in across for the roof, they're going to have a stud to sit on nicely. And what I've also done is I've made a box for the window. It is just a rough box because my panes of glass haven't turned up, so I haven't been able to frame them. So I've made a box for the exact size that's going to be needed within the wall itself. While I'm framing, if I put the window box that I've made into the framing, I know when finally the windows do come, they're going to fit in the wall that I've got, hopefully upright at that stage. That's where making one of these frames has actually really helped, because I've been able to move it around, work out what height I'm going to have actually as my working surface within the workshop. This way, at head height, I need it a little bit higher. And remember, this wall is 10 centimetres lower than the front one. And then I can measure from below it for the studs that the window actually itself sits on, minus one extra 2x4 across, which is going to be to support it. Remember to leave enough space in for the larger stud that goes across to carry the weight of the roof and spread it round the window. For me, that is 150 mil. So with all those calculations in here, I need to transfer it to the floor and start laying things out and cutting a few of the studs that are going to go under this and working out if I've got anywhere that my spacement's going to work. So, don't judge me on this, but I do not know every single name of every single type of stud. What I do know is that the ones that are next to each other are much easier to screw together before you actually put them together with all of the other ones. Every window needs a sill plate beneath it, and it needs studs below that to hold it in place next to the upright studs next to it. And then it needs a top plate going across the whole top on top of the lintel that is between that and the window. And if none of that makes sense, don't worry. There are plenty of websites that are much smarter than me, and you can get the layout and just work it onto the deck that you are putting it together on. Get an expert's opinion rather than mine on this one. I screwed everything with 2 at the bottom, 2 at the top, screwed from the sides. I gave it as many screws as I thought I needed, and then I put in 50% more. Then I cut the lintels. Now, I think I've overkilled this a little bit because I got some 2x6s and I screwed them together with around about 50 screws. Actually, it's more like about 30, but you know, it's nice to exaggerate. And they're probably way too big for the windows. They probably support way more weight than they actually need to, but belt and braces and all that. And then, because I was lifting it on my own, I found this was a really handy way of stopping it slipping off the edge. And then, go on. Yeah, it was heavy. But it was up. And the other one, I just made a mirror version of it, because if I did the identical one, it just didn't look right. So I just did a mirror version, line it all down. You'll notice that the last thing to go in here are the top smaller studs, which have to be above their stud partners beneath. Cripple studs, I think they're called. I did these to fit because I didn't trust my measurements all out, and I thought that would be a good way of leaving it till the very last and just getting it so that it fitted perfectly. And, well, it did. I was quite surprised myself. Anyway, both walls up. Then I just hooked them together with some clamps because I knew that I was going to have to straighten them later, and I put some of the 150mm screw bolts that I've got in just between each one of the studs just to hold it in place. Screwed a few into the join between them just to make sure as well. But nothing permanent at this stage. Okay, we've got one job left to do on the front and the back wall here, and that's to put the double header on. Now, because we've got the join here, as we do on the front wall as well, I'm going to have to put a header across it, and I'm going to stagger where the joints are so that this will have a good firm long piece across the top of it. Also, I'm going to recess it by the width of a 4x2, and that's going to go on either side there so that the side walls can join on, because their double plate is going to come over and overlap with the back. Now, they are a very gentle camber, so I'm not too worried about the fact that it's not going to be completely flush. And the reason for that is when I first started squaring these walls up, I had no idea what I was doing. Still don't really. But I found a website by a gentleman called Ali Dimbach, and everything on there is outlined perfectly, and he goes into so much detail. I'll put a link in below to his channel. I worked through every single one of his videos, taking hints and tips and tricks, working out my framing from there. So if you're going to start a project anywhere similar to this, I would suggest that that is a good place. Anyway, stick around. Let's finish off these walls. Framing this side wall and this side wall, I'm going to start with the one at the back because it's got no doors. That seemed to be the easiest way so far. And I've got the bottom plate that I've wedged between the two uprights for the back and the front wall. And then I've put one of the studs identical to the height of the king stud on that wall, and I've lent it on the floor. I've done the same for one of the king studs on that wall. So basically, if I draw a line, which I'm going to use this chalk string, across the top, I will know exactly what height each one of the studs that I'm going to put in is going to go in. And then we need to mark them out and then we put a camber on the top. Let me show you. Technically, this is going to be where the top of our header is going to sit. And so let's just get some chalk on there. I'm going to go over this with a pencil because I'm not convinced in this weather that the chalk's going to stick around long. Now I'm going to be accurate. Let's move it up a bit. And I've got to say, this is probably the best tip that I got from Ali Dimmock's site, was just to lay the studs out, get them at your 400s, make sure they're all spaced out, and then you can see exactly where they're going to intercept with the top plate, and that's exactly where you've got to cut them. And it's really, really easy once you've marked it out properly to see where that line intersects them. What we've done here, I've just clamped the long top board across. Now I've left it long because it's going to be slightly longer because of the angle that it's set at, and then what I've done is I've marked centres matching the centres at the bottom. I haven't tried to level it with the line. The line is going to cross through each and every one of these studs, and we're just going to mark where it crosses so that we can do a nice cut, and that will even them all up and make sure the wall is the right height. First though, I'm just going to draw a pencil outline on each of them, because then I will know exactly where they go back, because obviously the centres on this header board are not going to be correct once everything's cut. So after that, I can just lay it down, screw it all in, and our wall is good to go. So let's do that. Now, this isn't just me showing off my circular saw, it's just to show how little I've adjusted it to get the camber right across the top of this test stud that I did. And with that set in place, I just did all of them the same and just made sure when I placed them back down that they met the line perfectly, and then I knew that the top plate would sit on them and be exactly the right height for the wall itself. Genuinely, when you've got a system in place like this, it really doesn't even take that long to get the wall fully screwed together, cut and ready to be lifted into place within what would probably have been about half an hour really of cutting and screwing. Now you can't really see it here, but actually because we make the wall inside of the other two walls, it is perfectly snug in its fit. So what I have to do here is just take the braces off and lean both of the upright walls just out by a couple of degrees so that I could raise the wall without it catching and then drag it back to where it needs to be on the back. Yeah, another two-man job done just by myself. Not smart. Anyway, the last job on there, and I purposefully didn't put them in because of the weight. The last job is just to alternate some noggins at around about the same height as the other walls and just make sure that none of those studs can twist. And then I just laid out the front wall exactly the same. It was slightly more complicated because of the wide door that I'm putting in there, but you just lay it out like you would a window. I made the lintel exactly the same way, two pieces of 2x6, and then I laid out all of the studs on the 400s, and where it came to the door, I just put two studs to hold the actual lintel up, just because I thought it's a little bit heavier and a little bit wider span than a window, and then one king stud going all the way to the top next to it, making a total of 3 upright studs on either side of the door. And then the rest were just normal. And there's space for some tiny, tiny cripple studs that I put just above the lintel, just to spread the weight down around that door frame itself. Once again, all studs that were butted up against each other were screwed together. And then all of the other studs were screwed 2 screws top, 2 screws bottom, and the wall was again ready to be raised. All 4 walls are up now, so I've just joined the corners together using clamps, and now we've got the job that's probably going to induce swearing, because I've got to square everything up. And I've had a little look with a level, it's not far off. I might need to undo some of the bottom plates and just pull it in a little bit at certain places, but I'm going to measure diagonal. I'm then going to get the spirit level, on the corners, make sure it's all flush, and I'm going to give myself a little bit of margin for error, because a little bit here and there, a couple of mil, is about as good as I could ever hope for with this sort of a build. So once we've done that, another tip I got from Ali Dimmock is to test that the walls aren't bowing in. His was longer than mine, so it should be easier on this potentially, but because we've got the join in the middle, it's going to take a very small line across the bottom and the top, pull it away from the base using 2 blocks of wood, and then check that the same width block of wood goes all the way along it, just to make sure that it doesn't bow towards us or away from us in the middle. If it does, we might have to brace it before we put the roof rafters on. Once I'm sure everything is as good as I'm going to get it, I'm then going to put the second top plate on. You'll see up here we overshot by about 4 mil, and that's going to cause a problem when the rafters are going across and we want to make the small overhang over the door. I either take out 4 of the uprights and take 4 mil off them and bring it down, or probably a better solution is to deal with it afterwards, put everything in place, and then cut the rafters going out that way. Just cut them a slight amount shallower to make sure that it's the same roof depth across the whole thing. But first, I'm going to measure up, I'm going to check the door is square, check the windows are square, check everything is square before we carry on. Now, I absolutely love this technique that Ali Dumak showed on his build. It is so unbelievably simple. Just the fact that you can pull the string out by the 2 blocks and then know from the middle block if it is slightly bowed inwards or outwards, the wall. And then all you got to do is take off your stud screws, as you can see here, just pulling them out, and then just kick it in whichever direction it needs to go. This time it was inwards, so I gave it some kicks and then screwed it back down. I will say, use different holes for the screws or they'll pull it straight. Or rather, the old holes will pull it back out of straight. I do fully intend on doing the same test across the top of the walls as well to make sure they're not bowing one way or the other, because they could bend in exactly the opposite way of the bottom. So there's no relying on just one technique. But I'm planning on doing that when the rafters are ready to go so that I can use them to hold it in place once it's ready. Anyway, corners are square, the walls at the base are square, so I just hooked everything together with more 150mm bolt screws to go through the studs at the bottom, and then some 100mm through the corners, stud to stud, and going at an angle because they're slightly longer than the width of the 2 studs. Last job was the second top plate. I just made sure that it was flush with all of the plate beneath it and came to the front and checked that it was flush on the front as well, and then just put 3 or 4 screws going downwards straight into the studs below. You wouldn't believe it, I was just about to close this video off and say that's it, the walls are done, they're square across the bottoms, we're ready to sheath them with the OSB, and then I realised I've got no noggins. So, I'm going to test if we've still got a bit of that woodworker magic left. There we go. So, that's everything I need to do with the walls. Next up, we've got to put some OSB sheets on the outside, which will shore everything up, and then the roof. Thanks for watching, I'll see you on the next one.